Welcome back. Peter and I are further discussing our topic of motivation. So we'll be delving a little deeper into some of these layers now. So, Peter, we were touching upon the why of what lies sort of within people. So is that sort of determined by, you know, what you do as a job? Is it sort of what you do outside of work, or is there, you know, how do people sort of, you know, define that, do you think, for themselves? And have you got any examples where there's been any sort of turning points?
So Simon, you're in luck. I'm going to tell you a little story, and I'll try and keep it short for the video. I was very fortunate to work in Boston for a couple of months on a project. And one weekend I went along to a university and listened to a professor speak. Now, I'm sure many people have heard the similar sort of story, but to see it, experience it, hopefully it will bring some resonance to people. So the professor comes out on stage and he has a large glass jar. And into the large glass jar, he places 5 large rocks on top of each other. And he asks the audience, you know, is my jar full? And most of the audience put up their hand to say no. And when questioned, they say, well, just put some smaller rocks in. So he very diligently reaches under his lectern and gets some small gravel, and he pours some more gravel in, gets to the top and, you know, kind of takes it around and goes, okay, my glass cylinder now, is it full? And everyone kind of goes, you know, 50-50 split. The 50% of people, when questioned, go, well, I can still see quite a few gaps. So he goes, well, you know, that's very good. And so he reaches under his lectern and he pulls out this bag of very fine sand. And he pours the sand in. He makes a big play of it, pats it down, levels it off, shakes it around, and goes, okay, is this now full? And almost everyone in the audience says yes. And one guy says, I'm really sorry, I'm a scientist. He said, even a grain of sand has a side. And so therefore, the only way you're going to be able to fill that is with a liquid. And so the guy says, that's the correct answer, reaches under his lectern, great big jug of water and pours it over. So the jar overflows and eventually settles until it's flat and full. And everyone in the audience agrees it's full. And it's a great visual thing to see. And he said, okay, so now let's talk about change. He said, what happens if I change some small things? So let's use this teaspoon and let's take out some water. Let's take out some gravel. What's changing in the glass jar? And the answer was, well, not a lot. Yeah. And so he reaches down and gets a dessert. And he goes, okay, let's now take out let's do medium-sized change. And he takes out a couple of spoonfuls of gravel and sand. And he goes, what's changing? And the answer is, well, really not a lot. And he said, okay, so let's do big change. And he rolls his sleeve up and he puts his hand into the glass jar and grabs one of the large rocks and pulls out. And that causes a big suction sound, and the gravel and the sand move, and some spills over the side and the edge. And it was quite a big event. Yeah. And he goes, that's big change. Everything else moved around the big change. And so therefore, when we talk about change, he said, what I want you to do is to identify what those big things are in your life. They might be family, they might be friends, they might be your hobbies, they might be your passions, but they are things that you care about. They are things that are your big rocks in your life. And if you can identify what those are, when you change something on those big 5, everything moves around it. And when you understand everything moves around it, then you plan that change very carefully. And if you remember back to episode 1, change that we control, change that we make happen, you have a certain amount of control over. You have you lead that change, you are ready for it, you're mentally prepared. But when change is put upon you, so right now things like redundancies or working at home or staying indoors, those changes are being imposed against you. And that makes you really stop. And that's why it's really important to ask the question of why and identify what those big things are. So for me, personally, my big change a couple of years ago, I lost my wife to cancer. And it made me really stop and think about what was important in my life. And actually work was not one of them. Things like looking after my children, being able to feed them without poisoning them, making sure their education didn't suffer, making sure that we still saw family and friends were all very important to me. And the reason why is that I wanted my children to stay as on a solid a footing as possible, to keep their friends, to keep their education moving along, to keep their routines as much as I could. My work at the time were amazing. Some of my colleagues did some, I mean, they know who they are. They did some amazingly wonderful things for me. I had a set of friends that were local to me that turned up and fed me for 3 months. It was an incredible time. And the thing that I reflect upon in this change is that I often stopped and asked myself, why is this important? Why do I care so much about this? And when you understand why it is you care or why it bothers you, then you can start to make a plan to correct those things or to change those things to rebuild your motivation. And that's kind of where we are today.
Yeah. And if these changes are of such scale, I mean, is this something that you kind of you address on your own, or is there is there other ways that you can kind of help yourself along that journey?
Well, we mentioned in our first video, it's Mental Health Awareness Week. Some people can and have the ability to do this on their own. Some people will need to reach out to other people, and they should. If you're sat there right now worried about somebody because they've had a bereavement in their family, because they're going through change, perhaps they're not coping, take the time, reach out to them, just say hi, just say, I was just thinking about you, how are you doing? Have a video chat, have a telephone call. Are you able to walk around and sit in their front garden and chat with them? There are so many things. I cannot tell you just how important it is for people to be themselves as much as they can and just reach out and kind of check in. This is a tremendous area. I'm not an expert. I don't pretend to be an expert. There are lines, there are telephone support, Samaritans, Childline, etc. I think the most important thing to do is just, if you are sat here now watching this video and perhaps you haven't acknowledged the fact that change is going on around you and it's being imposed on you and you're struggling with your motivation, just take a couple of minutes to realize that you're being forced through a change and actually identify those 2 or 3 things that are really important to you, and identify why they're important to you, and then perhaps put in a small plan about small steps that you can do that can help you to build your motivation levels back up. I think that's probably the best advice I can give. And as I said, I'm not an expert. There are plenty of experts out there, counsellors, etc. Just my view, just my opinion for what it's worth. And if it's made anyone today sit and stop and think about themselves or about someone else, then for me, the video's been a worthwhile exercise to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the a huge takeaway in all of this, whether it's however you sort of come about drawing a conclusion, I think it's just it is to talk to people, and it's to get whatever is felt internally, just kind of get it out. Don't perceive how other people may or may not sort of, people won't judge. Irrespective of what you might be thinking internally, they probably won't judge. In fact, the majority of people actually want to help. They want to do something, give you that ear. They want to be your voice if you are struggling to be heard, I suppose. So just talk about it.
I think the thing that surprised me the most, Simon, is at your time of need, sometimes you have to let your pride drop a little. You have to accept a bit of help, and that's a difficult thing to do. But actually, do you know what? People, your true friends, the people that care, the people that can help, will just be themselves. And when you realise that, and you lean into that discomfort, you lean into that change, then actually you can start to make a small difference. You can start to make a small change. And do you know what? Right now in the world, we are all going through change. So, my very first sentence, we're all on the same ocean of change, but we're all in very different boats. And sometimes we've got to look out for each other as well. Yeah,
wonderful. Lovely sentiment to finish on, Peter. Thank you so much again. And it's been lovely hearing your views on this. And if anybody wishes to message Peter or myself, drop them in the comments below. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Good to talk to you. Stay safe.